City Committee. It is 2:03. We are starting a little bit late. That being said, we're going to try to move through as much as we can, as quickly as we can today to still finish at a decent time. So before us, we have Senate File 3414. Senator Draheim, would you like to move your bill?
So moved. I would love to move Senate File 3414 to general orders.
Nice try. I see what you did there. Yeah. Well, very good. Your bill is before us. To your bill.
Thank you, Chair Duckworth and members. We are really short on time today. So if we could keep all the testimony to the bill, just real briefly, the bill prohibits local government from enacting rent control policies on private residents or private property. The bill is retroactive to November 1st of 2021, which would nullify the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul and their rent control measures that they did vote on. With that, I think, Chair, if it's okay with you, I'd rather get to the testifiers.
Very good. That sounds great. And just a reminder to everybody, we did start a little bit late, so we're going to try to move fairly quickly, and it still allows us to end at a decent time. I'm going to let the feedback get fixed real quick. So, whoop.
Whose computer is still?
Can I mute? Up to you, Joel. Somebody.
Chair, this is why we should be over in the other building.
Me? What do I agree. Oh, you gotta mute yourself.
So we have no idea who it was. We have no idea who was responsible for that, just for the record. We'll figure it out. Very good. Now that we've got that figured out, just some quick ground rules on how we're going to approach testifiers. We have some folks here that are going to speak in support of the bill. We've got some folks that are going to speak in opposition to the bill. And based on the number of folks who intend to speak either in favor or against, I'm going to limit folks to about 2 minutes if you're speaking in support of, based on the number of people that are here to testify, and those opposed will get 1 minute. I've got a little timer here, and so as you get close to you needing to wrap up your comments, I will politely let you know so that we can keep things moving. That being said, our first testifier is Mr. Paul Iger. Come on forward. If you could do us a favor, just introduce yourself, let us know who you're with, and then you've got a couple minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Paul Egger, and I'm Senior Vice President for Governmental Affairs for the Minnesota Realtors Association. We're a business trade association of over 21,000 members statewide. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today in support of Senator Draheim's Senate File 3414. Because you're short on time and because you had a great hearing on this topic last week, I will be very brief. Rent control is certainly not the answer to our housing challenges. We need more housing and more types of housing to meet demand, not policies like rent control that adversely affect property owners and reduce the quality and quantity of housing opportunities both now and in the future. Senator Draheim also carried a bill last session on which I testified, and I shared a few of the disincentives that rent control policies would create, including disincentives to invest in the construction of new rental properties, rehabilitate existing properties, and convert buildings from non-residential to residential use. Those are all activities that would either increase the supply of housing or improve our existing housing stock. Unfortunately, that bill last session was not enacted, and in November, both St. Paul and Minneapolis passed ballot measures on rent control. Over the past couple of months, there have been numerous reports by the media and in testimony you heard just last week of property owners, developers, and lenders responding rationally to the passage of those ballot questions by either raising rents, pausing projects, or looking outside of St. Paul and Minneapolis. I'd just like to highlight one item Mr. Mark Mason, who is a realtor and developer, shared with you in his testimony last week regarding the real-world impacts of rent control policies on communities. Mr. Mason testified that his company purchases blighted multifamily units, renovates them, and provides tenants with a nice place to live at or below market rate. He was looking at opportunities in St. Paul and Minneapolis in which to invest and make communities better, but is pulled out of those areas after the passage of the rent control ballot questions. Rent control is counterproductive to addressing our housing supply and affordability challenges. Instead, the focus should be on how to create the conditions that will result in more housing of all types to better meet consumer demand and achieve a market that is better balanced between landlords and tenants and buyers and sellers. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you, Mr. Egger. We appreciate it. Moving right along, next on the list is Mr. Jason George.
Whoa. That was
We
me,
know it
sorry.
was the chair. We got you.
Sure.
If anybody else is going to testify in person, be warned.
Be warned.
If you would please introduce yourself and let us know who you're with. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Jason George. I am the business manager of the International Union of Operating Engineers, Local 49. We are the largest construction union in the state, and we build the affordable housing in this state. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you, Senator Draheim, for bringing this bill forward. Senate File 3414, happy to support it. We strongly support it, and we thank you for bringing it forward again. I was in front of this committee not too long ago, so I won't repeat those comments about the disastrous impact that this rent control policy has had in my hometown of St. Paul, where I reside. But you can read it for yourself in the newspaper, which is pretty much every week now. We see something, another development canceled, rent going up for people, and chaos, quite frankly. What I really wanted to focus on is the notion that we can fix it. The city council can just fix it, or the mayor can just fix it. I think that is highly questionable at this point. There's many different legal opinions about whether or not they can adjust it at all, or whether or not they can make any adjustment that won't get them sued. And certainly anything they try to do will likely lead to litigation, which will create more confusion and more chaos for my city. So I think this measure, I speak to that to say that this measure is important for that reason. I think you all need to fix it and prevent this debacle from happening and coming to other communities in Minnesota that clearly don't understand when voters are going in the booth what they're voting for. It's very easy to say, hey, you want to pay less rent? Vote for this. That's the campaign. It's hard to combat, and facts don't seem to matter. So I encourage you all to act, help my community get rid of this, and also prevent other communities from being inflicted with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. George. Thank you. Next, we have Adam, and Adam D. I'm going to let you introduce yourself and tell us how to pronounce your last name.
Sure, thank you,
And
Mr.
who
Chair.
you're with, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Adam Dunnock with the North Central States Regional Council of Carpenters. Pleased to be here. I'm the Director of Government Affairs for the Carpenters. We represent 12,000 carpenters, millwrights, pile drivers, and industrial workers and interior system carpenters across the state of Minnesota, and 28,000 in our regional council. So I'm very pleased to be here. Thanks for having this hearing, Senator Draheim. We haven't always agreed on everything that comes before the legislature, but we strongly support here and are here to talk in favor of Senate File 3414. We do agree that the worst thing for our affordable housing crisis in the region and our state is a lack of housing supply and housing options. Rent control will not solve the problem of housing stability or lowering the cost of housing for renters. Only increasing the housing supply can lead to more affordable options for renters and their families. The proponents of this charter amendment said that our coalition was fear-mongering and exaggerating the impacts to housing development deals. They've been proven wrong. We now know that dozens of projects that have been shelved. We now know there are thousands of units that are not going to be built for at least a couple of years, and we now know that there will be thousands of less work hours for carpenters and their families to build these housing projects, while the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul work through the fallout of an ill-defined, misunderstood charter amendment. Just in the first month since the ordinance passed, there's been a downturn of over 80% of housing permits. That was just published just in the last week or so. And so we continue to see the fallout of this ill-defined charter amendment. The question wasn't should rent be less, but that's what the public discussion amounted to. And to stand up and tell, and unfortunately there were leaders in this region that were not bold enough to stand up to and tell activist groups that they are wrong. And now the result will be less building and less affordable housing. What will happen because of the demand is that more housing will be built in communities like Richfield, West St. Paul, Roseville, Maplewood, and St. Louis Park, and numerous other communities that will end up creating more gentrification of our center cities. And neighborhoods with higher concentrations of affordable housing or will have either high concentrations of affordable housing or extremely expensive housing. This seems to work against the stated goals of the proponents of rent control. And there are many ways to mitigate the negative impacts of rent control, and one that we've heard most about from the mayors of both Minneapolis and St. Paul is to include an exemption on new construction. We support that idea. Including this exemption is a prudent cause, but what's missing is that that was not part of the charter amendment to begin with. That's what is missing from the current initiative and referendum model. It's a major flaw for a small number of signatures to drive a policy discussion that then we have to come back and correct. And so that's why we support the Senate file here today. Rather than walk through a list of ways to fix the flawed policy, let's support Senate File 3414 and start over about housing affordability in this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunick. Next, we have Mr. Cecil Smith. If you please come forward, introduce yourself, and let us know who you're with.
Chair Duckworth, Senator Draheim, members of the committee, my name is Cecil Smith. I'm the President and CEO of the Minnesota Multi-Housing Association, representing 1,800 members with over 300,000 units of housing in the state. We are here in support of Senate File 3414. I was here last week to testify. I won't repeat most of my testimony other than to say that this policy has taken Minnesota off the national map for investment. It's not just St. Paul that's affected. There's reputational damage that has been done to our state by enacting rent control. There are maps that are produced for investors, and now Minnesota is on the map for rent control. Unlike the coast, so drawing us into the same group of places like Oregon, California, New Jersey, New York, as rent control states. What's happened has been a lack of investment that immediately stopped in St. Paul. Mr. Dunick has just referenced the MinPost report published today talking about the 80% drop in building permits in the 3 months since rent control was enacted compared to the previous time period the year before. That's a significant decline. Our analysis and what we've been able to record is over 3,100 units that have been paused or stopped in St. Paul with a valuation of over $950 million. We don't have all the data, but that's what we have been able to document. That's a terrible impact on the city of St. Paul. It's a terrible impact on future property tax revenues for that city. It's a terrible impact for the people who needed that housing, and it's a terrible impact for all the jobs that would have gone into the creation of that housing. And for this reason, we're strongly in support of Senate File 3414. One final point, and we know that there's a stakeholder group. The mayor was here last week talking about his stakeholder group, 41-member stakeholder group, that is working on the fixes, which we don't believe is really possible for rent control. But most glaringly, the 41 stakeholder group did not include financial institutions, the capital markets. Financial institutions, the equity and debt markets are critical factors. I cannot go, as an operator, I cannot go buy another building unless I have my capital partners. As a developer, I cannot go create new housing unless I have my capital partners, both equity and debt capital. They're not in the stakeholder group, and they are critical to bringing back housing in St. Paul. So I urge passage of Senate File 3414. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Thank you.
Before we change gears, is there anybody else here in person that intends to testify in support of this or on Zoom? All right, great. Hearing or seeing none, I will invite Ann Schulman up next. If you could introduce yourself and let us know who you're with. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. My name is Ann Schulman, and I'm a St. Paul renter. I'm a 61-year-old frontline healthcare worker on a fixed income in Minnesota Care. I pay for rent out of saved alimony that I no longer receive. I could not afford an apartment of my own at my current salary and use retirement funds. For the past 9 years, I've worked for Our Lady of Peace Community Hospice, currently as a contract employee doing Healing Touch, which is easier on my back. My yearly salary increase is 0. January of this year, the rent for the apartment that I moved into the previous year increased $100, which is close to 9%. All stability that I had regarding shelter and finances felt yanked away. One reason I was told for this steep rent hike was that they wanted to bring the apartment up to market value to meet this 3% cap. What did they mean by market value? Before I moved into this apartment, it sat vacant for at least 5 months. My current unit is a small 2-bedroom apartment for $1,350 with few amenities. 2 other units similar to mine remained vacant. Their price list dropped to $1,295. When my lease was about up, I requested my rent be lowered to match market value. Instead, I got a $100 increase. It's predatory practice. The only thing stopping such practices in the future is this 3% rent cap. I live on Marshall Avenue between Cretin and Cleveland, and within these 2 blocks, there are currently 4 apartment complexes going up. It is clear that development will continue in St. Paul and that landlords are crying wolf trying to derail this important ordinance. In addition, housing inequities have excessively fallen on BIPOC households. This 3% cap will help address inequities and create stability. I need affordable housing, and tenants who work 2 jobs, have children, and are living paycheck to paycheck need it even more. I encourage the Senate to move away from injurious action that might repeal this rent stabilization ordinance chosen by the people. Give this ordinance support and time to have effect. Step back from the brink and let voters have a voice. They already voted. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Schulman. Is there anybody else here in person that intends to give testimony in opposition to this bill? Okay, seeing none, we're going to move to our next group of testifiers, who I believe are all on Zoom. And the first one I have on my list is Gabby Santiago. So if you're with us, feel free to turn your mic on, introduce yourself, let us know who you're with, and begin.
Hello, my name is Gabby Santiago. I live in the Summit University or Rondo neighborhood of St. Paul. This is an economically diverse neighborhood, and I value the range of people and experiences that brings into our lives. I have personally gotten to a point where I am comfortable economically, but I do not want any of my neighbors to be driven off by rising rent prices. When I graduated in 2011, having stable housing to go home to after an 8-hour shift with a 1.5-hour bus commute both ways, or after hustling between 2 different jobs on opposite sides of St. Paul, made a huge difference in keeping me together both financially and mentally and able to work towards my goals. I did do my research and I engaged with both sides before voting for rent stabilization. And I ultimately voted yes, because I believe this is an important tool in the toolbox to address our housing challenges. That is why I oppose a preemption of rent stabilization, because it is an obstruction of the will of the majority of the voters in our city who have done the work of engaging with these issues and clearly stating the path that we want to take forward. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Santiago. Next, we have Dana Kennedy. Go ahead and unmute yourself, introduce yourself,
Thank you.
and let us know who you're with.
Thank you. I'm Dana Kennedy. I live in St. Paul. I'm a private citizen. I was born into an upper middle class family, but alcoholism killed my father in his 30s. My mother sold everything and moved all 5 of us into a 2-bedroom apartment. We lived on mattresses on the floor with cockroaches and weevils. We had terrible landlords and sometimes moved twice a year. I don't want any child to go through the instability that moving caused in my childhood. So I worked hard to pass rent stabilization in St. Paul. Rent stabilization is successful in hundreds of cities in the US. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. I'm insulted when I hear voters did not understand what they were voting for. Voters heard both sides. Many of the testifiers who support preemption had $4 million to persuade people to vote no, yet they lost. Every vote should count. The thought of a powerful few canceling tens of thousands of votes is bone-chilling. Please don't pass this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Next, we have Maria Isa Perez Hedges. If you would go ahead, unmute yourself, introduce yourself, to let us know who you're with.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Maria Isa Perez Hedges, and I have lived my entire life in the capital city of St. Paul, Minnesota. I'm a mother of a soon-to-be 3-year-old born and being raised in St. Paul, and I direct mentorship for the nonprofit organization Twin Cities Mobile Jazz Project, serving St. Paul youth in partnership with over 3 St. Paul Park and Recs locations, from the Frogtown neighborhood, Dayton's Bluff, and my beloved neighborhood of the West Side's Rio Vista. Not only have I built artistic endeavors and platforms volunteering on the Keep St. Paul Home campaign, I took time to organize conversations and host events for our city's youth and their families to understand empowerment of their voices, to bring change in the urgencies of their traumatic realities facing homelessness and displacement from the only communities that they know, have built, and dream to continue living in. St. Paul voters voted yes, because we are a community of diverse groups of people unified to continue to build together, work together, educate together about the history we've made together, and raise the next generation of St. Paul kids in the places we pay to be our home. When St. Paul voted yes, it won. Not only provided calm for the head of a household struggling to pay the rising rent costs, it brought a level of hope for the children of these households to be recognized that the people's vote matters to influence what happens in our communities. I work every day with these youth of St. Paul. When they are booted out of their homes over and over due to the instability of being priced out of their homes repeatedly, it creates an unstable environment, an unstable level of stress to carry, affecting their mental, social, and emotional health. SF 3414 is forcing a message that our youth and communities' hard work through advocating in the political process and organizing voters is undermined and stripped away, especially when it comes to these big pocket interest groups that are speaking here today. I want to see the community I rent to be able to grow and provide more opportunities for our youth, to be able to achieve their goals, survive, create histories where legacies have made St. Paul the great city it is. I don't want to see more of our youth and their families being displaced. I want to see and will be dedicated to work on providing educational outcomes and community stability, not homelessness. This is the land of over 10,000 lakes. We shouldn't be faced with the reality that this is becoming the land of over 10,000 homeless Minnesotans. Minnesota and members of the Senate, please do not move forward with passing SF 3414. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Ms. Perez Hedges. Next, we have Betsy Brauman. If I mispronounce your last name, I apologize. Feel free to unmute yourself, introduce yourself, and let us know who you're with.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name's Betsy Brauman, and I live in St. Paul. I'm a retired St. Paul Public Schools teacher. I worked on the east side where nearly all of the families I worked with were renters. It was clear in my experiences working with these families that renters are at the mercy of the market and susceptible to price gouging that often results in displacement. Growing up, I moved multiple times. I understand the impact of frequent moves. Families living with fear or threat of instability can experience a sense of isolation and despair. As Mayor Carter mentioned when he testified last week, the disruption of housing instability is incalculable. No Minnesotan should have to live this way. Voters across class, race, and ward in St. Paul and Minneapolis recognized this too and voted 53% in support of rent stabilization. It angers me that the powerful few are striving to override the voice of thousands of voters and rob us of a win we voted on. It's unconscionable. I respectfully urge this committee not to move Senate File 3414 forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brauman. Next, we have Jenny DeLuca. Feel free to unmute yourself, introduce yourself, and let us know who you're with.
Yeah, I'm unable to take my, to get back on the screen, but I'm Jimmy DeLuca, a homeowner in St. Paul, and whether you're white, black, or brown, or how much money you make, all Minnesotans deserve to have their votes respected. As a state, we pride ourselves in a higher voter turnout and civic engagement. And last year, St. Paul and Minneapolis voters got civically involved. Minnesota legislative requirements were followed, and thousands of signatures were collected, verified, and rent stabilization went on the ballot. In November, 30,965 St. Paul voters and 75,598 Minneapolis voters voted yes for rent stabilization. And that's why I am deeply concerned about Senate File 3414 and its effort to stop any voter in Minnesota from voting on rent stabilization at the local level. How can a few elected officials override the will of the people? Wealthy corporate interests that have sway with politicians should not have more power than the will of the people. Do we have a democracy or a plutocracy? Please do not move forward with passing SF 3414. Don't cancel our votes. Respect them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. DeLuca. Next, we have B. Rosas. If you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself, introducing yourself, and letting us know who you're with.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is B. Rosas. I use they and them pronouns, and I worked as a part of a member of the Keep St. Paul Home campaign. I've been a renter my whole life, and so the issue of housing is very important to me and my family. So hearing this bill coming out of the state Senate was honestly very shocking to me. I never thought that democracy and the voice of Minnesotan communities would be up for questioning at this level. I believe that state representatives are here to uplift the voices of voters, not try to silence them. What we saw in St. Paul was a true act of solidarity. People of different races, cultures, and job titles truly came together to tackle housing inequalities that were hurting Minnesotans. This should be celebrated. Our hard work of talking to over 30,000 residents in St. Paul should not be looked at as bad behavior. The voices of the working class people should not be overshadowed by the real estate lobby that lost big this last November. Local initiatives are not the problem. Local initiatives are the solution to the generations of displacement, harm, and inequalities that still face this state. This bill would do none of that. Please don't move forward with this bill. Thank you so much.
Very good. Thank you, B. Rosas. Next, we have Monica Bravo. If you would please unmute yourself, introduce yourself, and let us know who you're with.
Hello, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Monica Bravo, and I am opposed to Senate File 3414. I'm a resident of St. Paul, and I am also a renter. I believe in the voting power, and I believe in the voting, whether it's yes or no. In November, 30,000 residents, over 30,000 residents, voted yes for rent stabilization in St. Paul, and it matters. And if this bill were to pass, it would undermine the democratic process of thousands of Minnesotans. I grew up in St. Paul. Our family of 7 moved often. One year, we moved 5 times. And I attended 4 different schools that year. I firmly believe that when we stabilize the rents, we're stabilizing the sacredness of our family units and our homes. We stabilize our communities, the educational outcomes, the employment outcomes, and you decrease the underpinning socioeconomic factors of violence that's plaguing our cities. Rent stabilization is a powerful way to stabilize our communities and our economic future. Democracy is about we the people, not we the corporations or we the profits. And if we not do something to stop this trajectory of prioritizing profits over people, homeless encampments is what we will have to normalize and desensitize ourselves with, because there will be very few options for those most marginalized. Please do not move forward with passing Senate File 3414. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bravo. Next, we have Tram Hoying. If you could go ahead and unmute yourself, introduce yourself, and let us know who you're with.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Tram Huang. I'm a homeowner in Minneapolis and the Director of Policy and Research at the Housing Justice Center, which is the policy, advocacy, and legal nonprofit. Our organization is one of over 50 organizations across labor, faith groups, neighborhood groups, community developers, and social service providers who work to engage tens of thousands of voters in Minneapolis with the Home to Stay Coalition and in St. Paul with the Housing Equity Now St. Paul Coalition. We are opposed to Senate File 3414 because conversations about how cities can address the housing crisis must also happen in the communities in which people are experiencing housing stability with the people who see its impacts and have a deep understanding of what their neighbors need. We must not take away the ability of cities to be responsive to the needs of residents. The state should allow for localities to act as their electorate choose. Many of the real estate industry reps are telling doomsday stories of disinvestment and the end of all supply, but we know better. Real estate is complex, and from changes in zoning to interest rates, we know there are dozens of factors that influence investor decision-making. One simple policy, especially one that is already in use in over 180 cities across the country, won't change that. There are much larger forces at play: a labor shortage, rising interest rates, a supply chain crisis, global economic shifts. We would be naive to think that all of the things happening in this country, of all the things happening in this country and world, a city ordinance is to blame for shifting markets. Our housing crisis is the result of many issues, and there's no silver bullet to solving it, but now is the time where we need as many tools as possible. And taking one away is not only harmful to our democracy, but also hurts our ability to ensure that every Minnesotan has a home. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Huang. That completes the list of testifiers That completes the list of testifiers I have. If there's anybody else online, raise your hand via Zoom, and we'll certainly let you speak. Otherwise, we'll transition to questions. But before we do that, Senator Draheim, if you'd like to make any comments based on what's been shared with us thus far.
Thank you, Chair Duckworth and members. There's a lot to unpack there. I really appreciate everybody testifying for and against this bill. And members, there are some written statements too. So if you have time, please grab your packet and go through them. I appreciate those too. But, you know, we heard a lot of good stories from a lot of different people. But I think my biggest takeaway is that our social programs are failing. We have housing instability program after program after program after program. And obviously, they're not working in St. Paul and in Minneapolis. And it's really concerning to me that we have these safety net programs to help people out, like what was described in the stories we heard. And I think we've all identified the main problem is we don't have enough units. Everybody's in agreement of that. The right, the left, everybody. We don't have enough building units. And for those who testified against the bill, I guess the reason we want to close this loophole is there has been studies for decades on what rent control does all over the world and every form of government, and they have never worked. And what happens when rent control is enacted is the exact opposite of what we need. We need unit creation. We have seen just in a short time period here, just a few months, building permits drop like a lead balloon in St. Paul. So when Mayor Carter was here last week, he mentioned we needed 11,000 housing units in St. Paul. Well, by just my glancing through media, I can count like 5,000 just like that. And that doesn't count the ones we didn't know about. So in a short time period, we have derailed almost half the goal for St. Paul to build more housing units. I could ramble on forever, Chair. I think we should go to questions if that's okay with you.
If it's okay with you, it's okay with me. Questions? Members? Senator Dietzig, please.
There we are. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Draheim. Is that better? Oh, my picture's not on, sorry. There we go. There we go. Sorry, technology. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Draheim. You know, I think we need to find ways, and I think we'd all agree we need to find ways to stabilize rent. We have a lot of people that don't, you know, they just can't afford the rents. There's about 500,000 people across Minnesota that are paying more than 30% of their income in rent. So how do we help them? They're, you know, some of the lower income wages are going up now, but over the last 10 years, wages have been stagnant, especially on that lower end, where rents have dramatically increased, especially in the metro area here. So what are we doing to help those people? You talked about how there's not units. Well, there's tons of new apartment units in my district, but none of them are for the lower income. None of them are at the people living at 50% below area median income. So what are we doing to build those new units? What are we doing to give those people housing? I think we need to have the conversation on what are we doing to help stabilize rent and to help people in their apartments. What are we doing to deal with rent displacement? So we have a lot of corporate hedge funds buying apartment buildings and now buying single-family homes, and people are being displaced. So I'll be voting no. And I think I would like to change the conversation to figure out how we help people stay in their homes. So, thank you.
Senator Draheim.
You know, thank you, Senator Dietzig, for that comment. We've had a lot of discussion on housing in the 5.5 years I've been here. You know, I think our last 5.5 years, we have focused on housing more than any other time period. We have spent a ton of money on housing infrastructure bonds that go primarily to what you're describing, housing units for percentages of the AMI and supportive services. So I think we have done a lot, but as discussed earlier, we can't do it alone. The government cannot solve this problem. We need partners with the big corporations or whatever, however the testifiers described the people that build housing units. We need to work with them. We need their help. We cannot afford to build 50,000 housing units. And you look at what we spent and how many housing units we've got for it, at $600,000 an apartment unit, that's pretty hard to make that affordable. So we need their help, and I think it was Mr. Smith that said we have to work with the lenders that are going to borrow the money. And if we chase away the banks that are going to back the projects, it's either going to raise the cost of the project so we can create fewer units, or they're not going to come at all. So I know it's a very complicated arena when you're talking about development, but we have chased away, well, the permits are 80% less, is what the report said today, 80% less than a year ago. So, sorry, Chair.
No need to apologize. Thank you, Senator Draheim. Is it a follow-up, Senator Dietzig?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I'll be brief. And I'll acknowledge I haven't read that report yet, but I did see numbers out earlier within the last week, and it made me wonder how much of that, and again, I haven't looked at specific, and this was a long time, but it did make me see the numbers that were dropping, and that did concern me because we do have this shortage that we need to fill the gap. We need to make up, and I'll go just a little bit here. You talked about 50,000 units, and we need to move 50,000 people of color into homes to make 15%, close that gap 15%, and that's the home ownership, and it's a different thing. But just, again, when we're talking about all these numbers, we have a lot of work to do. And I'm glad this committee is tackling some of these issues. But what I was wondering, and we can't control that, how much of those permits slowing down has to do with the workforce shortage, labor shortage, the uncertainty right now of what's going on, what is the economy, what are the interest rates going to be. So, you know, I think we also need to just consider that because I don't know the answer to that. So you might.
Chair,
Senator Draheim, please.
Thank you. You know, I don't know if the folks from the trades have heard anything, or the multi-housing folks on that. I just know what I've read in the paper and the reports I've seen. And that's basically they're pulling out because of rent control. But if anybody else has any comment or would like to answer that is here in the room, feel free to come up to the table and make a statement.
I see somebody making their way up there. It looks like Mr. Dunick is. Feel free to elaborate or give us your thoughts on the question that's been posed and the discussion we're having. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's Adam Dunick here again from the North Central States Regional Council of Carpenters. Just to respond to that inquiry, over the last 10 years, our membership of our union where they build multifamily construction housing has grown from 400 members to nearly 1,600 or 1,700 members. We have met the need that the construction companies and developers have to build housing. That's not the issue. To be very clear, everything we've been hearing has been from developers. It has to do with financial investments and what the investor community is looking at, and they're not looking at the Twin Cities. I could tell you multiple stories of developers and general contractors either having projects stopped or canceled as they are about to go forward, or just, you know, in terms of being in the speculation phase and saying we're not going to be able to just look at the region for a couple of years until you guys get this sorted out. It's very clear that that's the cause of it. It's not supply chain, it's not labor issues.
Mr. Dunick, thank you. I have a follow-up question for you related to this matter. We've talked about how we've seen permits since this law was enacted in St. Paul substantially decrease. Permits to build. You may not be able to shed light on this question, but I ask it to you anyway. In other areas where this law was not enacted, have they seen an 80% drop-off in projects and building?
Not to my knowledge. I probably am not the best person. I don't watch building permits, you know, region-wide, statewide, but we certainly have people that do. And in terms of what's on the books for the season, it doesn't seem like that kind of slowdown is happening in other places in the region or statewide.
Very good, thank you. Senator Rosen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Senator Draheim, for this. And I kind of can answer that question, actually, because this is a fascinating subject, rent control. And so I've been doing a little research of my own. And the building permits in St. Paul are down 80% since rent control went in place. But they're up 68% in Minneapolis because there is a discussion about rent control. And they're up nationally 17%. And I do believe that it's not about labor shortage. It's about fear, basically, and the consequences. And that's what I think rent control is showing. There's consequences to this. Whenever democracy speaks, or the people speak, we respect that very much. But it's also our job to come in and make sure that it works and it's right for the people. So we have to be somewhat nimble and adjust, and I think that's what this bill is doing. We want to make sure that everybody's clearly understands the consequences to this. St. Paul is truly the strictest rent control in the nation. And just there's 37 other states that have banned the practice of rent control or rent stabilization, and approximately 180 to 200 cities have enacted rent control, but they have put in there the ordinance for some flexibility and exemptions such as inflationary CPI caps, new construction exemption, age or structure exemption, number of units, vacancy decontrol, capital improvements, pass-through operating cost adjustments, or property tax adjustments. Everything there that I just listed, St. Paul does not have. And I think that's really, really critical. So it is the most rigorous of all the rent controls in the country. And the cities I know that have an aggressive rent control, they're the coastal, they're on both coasts. And it's stagnant as far as affordability in that area. So one other thing I'd like to say there's, it's very strong in cities like San Francisco, Oakland, and Berkeley, but it's depressed the development market, makes small rental housing providers hesitant to get in the business, and constrains necessary improvements to the property. So it can take down an entire city. And that's why we have to be We have to adjust as we go along here, and I think that's what this bill does. So thank you, Senator Draheim. I know this is a very tough lift, but the conversation and the ability to adjust as we go along is so important, and I hope Mayor Carter, I felt he is talking that direction when he was here, because he understands. He truly understands that he's put his city into a vice, and it's only going to get worse. So hopefully these conversations about adjusting with new construction is going to bear some fruit and make everybody calm down. But right now, there is no comfort.
Thank you, Senator Rosen. Senator James.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And Senator Dietzig, I think you brought up some really good points. We need to talk about what we can do to try to get more houses built. You know, it's kind of interesting in rural Minnesota, in many cases, we'll have contractors, developers come in and they want to build a duplex or a 10, 12 unit. And they look at some of the money that they can get through the Minnesota housing programs. And it drives the cost up so high that those people decide not to use those programs and end up either trying to get bank financing, which moves the cost of those units up, which lowers the cost of the unit, but they don't have any support to take care of that middle, so then the rent rates go up. And so if we really are serious about getting more housing units, we need to make sure that we're taking a look at what we're doing that hampers the building of houses out in rural Minnesota. And rural Minnesota is no different than any other part of the state. We don't have near the number of needs than what other cities do, but we do have the need. The other thing is we need to take a look at our rules and regulations. If you take at the rules and regulations and what happened in the last 10 years, it really makes it tough for a lot of these people to build these smaller units. And in outstate Minnesota, in Redwood Falls, we don't need a 50, 60 unit apartment, but it sure would be nice if we had an 8 or 10, or we had some single family housings. We had a family housing project in my district, and it was going along rather fine, and then there happened to be a few hiccups, and the next thing, why it didn't happen. And it didn't happen mostly because of what was going on in St. Paul. And so those things are really fortunate. Unfortunate, but another thing that is happening in rural Minnesota, in my district, is when we had that rent issue this winter, when people were, the rent help program, we had many of folks in rural Minnesota that probably owned, 3 to 5 homes and rented them out. That was going to be part of the retirement package. Well, when that came along and they started not getting paid for rent and all of these things started to happen, we all know what's happened to the price of houses. It's went up considerable. So these people are looking at that and saying, if I can't get paid for rent and we're going to have all these new rules, I'm going to get out when this housing market is high. It's amazing the number of those people that own 3, 4, 5, maybe 8 houses, sold those houses all off. Those houses now went to people that were looking for a home, and you just took that many rental units out. And so that's causing some real issues. So I think one of the things we have to do is back up and take a look at really what we necessarily have to have, and then take a look at some of these other rules and regulations and see what we can do to change that. And realize, and I'm not saying the rent thing was good, bad, or indifferent, but I'm saying we have to understand that there's consequences. And I can tell you, a year and 2 from now, if we think we got problems now, we're gonna see what the problems really are. Because we have lost a lot of rental units, and with what St. Paul is doing, you're gonna lose a lot more there. In rural Minnesota, unless we start getting this so that it's feasible to use some of these programs, we're not gonna see that new construction, and we're seeing a bunch of them being sold because of the things that are happening. So I think a lot of it, we just need to sit down and take a look and see what we can do to help these developers be able to do this and do it financially reasonable so that they got a small return on their investment. And that's what it's all about, is a little return on your investment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Dames. Senator Port.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to start by saying that I think rent stabilization is a really complex issue. And I have my own very real concerns about the unintended consequences that often come with policies like this, as we've seen in other cities. But to me, that's not what this bill is about or what our vote today is about. There was an election on rent stabilization in multiple jurisdictions, and supporters and opponents made their cases, and voters cast their ballots. And this bill before us today retroactively overthrows the votes of the people in those communities. And for me, that's a really dangerous precedent to be offered here, to say that when this body doesn't like the will of the people, we will simply undo it. It is unfortunately, not a unique occurrence, and we continue to see sort of the divisive and dangerous consequences that attacks on our democracy have. What I'm concerned about with this bill is that it's not a discussion about the policy of rent stabilization or housing or rental affordability. And we should be having that discussion. Voters told us in their jurisdictions that they want to have that discussion, that housing affordability is absolutely vital to them. But for me, this is a question of democracy in front of us today. And last week we heard from Mayor Carter and his community that they are taking seriously that vital nuance that has to be a part of these policies. And to Senator Rosen's point, I think he's taking into consideration some of the changes, some of the nuance that might be required in these policies. We should be having this conversation about what Senator Dietzig said. How do we make those absolutely necessary changes? How do we build that supply? How are we doing that? And that's not in front of us today. I hope we will be hearing Senator Dietzig's bill for rental subsidies that could help stabilize the rental market. We could be hearing a bill about how are we could spend some of our $9 billion surplus to really up the supply of housing in Minnesota. But today we're hearing a vote about democracy, and this is an attack on it. And I struggle myself sitting here as an elected official who was voted in by my community to turn over the votes of other communities. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
If I could, Chair, on that.
Go right ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Senator Port, for your comments, and I know it is a complicated issue. And why are we here? What is my interest in this? If we do not correct this, which we tried to do in the past before the vote was cast, and we were blocked by passing that, it's going to cost the state hundreds of millions of dollars if we do not fix this. We had about 30,000 people vote in favor of this rent control measure in St. Paul. Senator Rosen got more votes than that in her district. I got close to that in my district. And Senator Rosen probably has more pigs in her district than people. So it 30,000 people are going to cost us hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars when we've already spent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars trying to fix some of the problems you just mentioned. The issue of the vote, it's our right. Another right, and one of the fundamental building blocks of our country is property rights. So you are taking away private property rights. If there's government-owned or nonprofit-owned apartments, do what you want with them. But here you're telling private individuals what they can and can't do with their property. So that's kind of where I come from. I appreciate your opinion. I appreciate your comments. I don't disagree that we need to look at more. Unfortunately, the way our committees are set up, a lot of those programs aren't in our committee. But it is a discussion we need to have. And why aren't they working? We cannot control what happens with local property taxes in a community. And if they go up, landlords have to react to that. And another thing that doesn't really get talked about much, commercial insurance. we had a lot of damage, $500 million of property damaged up here in the metro. That affected commercial insurance rates. And when that happens, that gets passed on through to the tenants. And that's the last thing they need. We all agree rent is too high. So I appreciate the comments. I'll stop, Chair. I think we should try to wrap it up.
We will wrap it up. I want to share some comments. Senator Rusk, please go ahead.
May I speak?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senator Draheim. I don't call the program that was passed rent stabilization. I think that's a euphemism. I call it rent control. I appreciate the argument that you make. That's okay, just leave it, okay? I appreciate the argument you make about private property rights. I respect that. I also, however, believe that with private property rights comes private property obligations in order to keep the sense of community in itself valued by the community. As much as I respect private property rights, I join others in appreciating the will of the people expressed in elections of any kind. And when you talk about, well, it's not all that many people, well, I won my first election by 57 votes. And I considered that just as valid if I had won it by 70% of the votes. It didn't affect my obligations, it didn't affect my sense of duty, it didn't affect opportunity to bring benefits to my constituents. And as much as I appreciate private property rights, as much as I think that rent control is a failed policy, as it is currently instituted in any number of places, I cannot get beyond the fact that the people of St. Paul, considering, or Minneapolis, anywhere, considering both sides of the question, being lobbied on both sides of the question, that they, not out of a sense of greed or wanting to get away with something, but looking at what they think is the best way forward for their community, that they said yes to this proposal. They may have buyer's regrets coming up. I suspect they may, really. But I can't get beyond that. And I am I'm going to be voting no as well, with all kinds of respect for the author of the legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rest. Very good points. I'm beginning to feel a little self-conscious about how many votes I received in my election with all this talk. That being said, though, I would like to make a few comments, and I do want to ask a question of Mr. Smith, if he would come back up, and then I'll turn it over to Senator Draheim for closing comments. I think it's pretty clear, Senator Draheim, that you're not trying to win a popularity contest with this bill, which tells me the only reason you would carry it is because you feel very strongly about it, that it matters, and that you are very concerned about the second and third order potential consequences that rent control could have in a city like St. Paul and really permeate throughout the state of Minnesota. I think no matter how well-intended something might be, not fully understanding or really not acknowledging the consequences that it's been shown to have in other parts of the world or country is, a self-fulfilling prophecy to think that that wouldn't happen here. And you're kind of allowing yourself to buy an argument that maybe not has bared to be true in other areas. I don't think many of the goals we've talked about are mutually exclusive from one another. I think we can look at affordability. I think we can look at taking folks of different minorities and helping them become homeowners, helping their affordability, while also prioritizing the increase of more units across the state and in the Twin Cities. Those aren't mutually exclusive. And oftentimes when we talk about this, and I so much appreciate everybody that testified in opposition to this, very compelling stories. You tug at our heartstrings, and sometimes we feel like, you may feel like we don't hear you or that we don't sympathize with you or understand what you're going through. And we do. We acknowledge that it's difficult. We acknowledge that affordability is a challenge. But we also acknowledge, somebody referenced kids in their testimony, we also reference and acknowledge that if we prevent the construction of more units and we thereby make rent and housing more expensive, it's those kids and those future generations that are going to be priced out of the American dream. And that's why I get fired up about rent control, and that's why I'm very supportive of this bill. You know, we can't make home ownership, we can't make affordability even more harder to achieve for folks, because we may not feel it immediately in the short term, but in the long term, those future generations are going to be having to pick up the pieces when it comes to trying to solve a housing crisis that was only unfortunately further exacerbated. So Mr. Smith, my question to you is if you could just give us just a quick idea of how enacting rent control has second and third order effects that actually increase the cost of housing, whether it be rent or actual prices, and how damaging that could be. I would greatly appreciate it if you could give us just a quick 1 minute to 2 minute summary of that.
So rent control has many effects. We're witnessing it in St. Paul already prior to the enactment, with previously naturally occurring affordable housing now being repriced to market pricing in anticipation of the May 1st enactment. So there's a major reset that's happening, which forever makes those units more expensive. What also tends to happen is that rent increases then are marked based upon the caps, and everybody just follows the cap. We saw this phenomenon in Minnesota when we changed late fees. Most owners charged $20, $30 late fees, but we marked it to 8% as the maximum, and most property managers in the state changed their late fee to 8%. And so people started getting $80 late fees instead of $30 late fees. The market responds naturally and very organically to these kinds of things. So we've seen in other jurisdictions where there's been spillover effects into neighboring markets. So we can expect surrounding suburbs to become more expensive because of limited supply in St. Paul as fewer units get developed. Even with a new development exemption, there'll be fewer units developed because after 15 years, they're rent controlled. There isn't a free market pricing for those units. So the shifts occur to other neighboring communities, and it makes those communities more expensive. And we see gentrification occurring around cities where there's been rent control enacted. And you alluded to the long-term effects. Well, rent control and rent-stabilized units are great for the residents in those units. But for prospective renters, for people who are looking to live in that community, for people who, from the next generation that want a place to live in that community, there isn't available housing. And depending upon what the rules are, if it's an exempt unit, they may be paying a premium to get into that unit. So these are all the long-term effects. Depending upon whether there's vacancy control or decontrol, you can often see dereliction of property and abandonment of reinvestment into the housing infrastructure. And so we see a decline and decay of housing in rent-controlled cities. And most notably, New York saw this, and then they had to relax their rent control policies to try and reinvigorate reinvestment in housing because they just had these terrible derelict buildings. So these are some of the effects that just flow on, have been well documented by researchers who have looked at the economic effects and the deleterious economic effects of rent control and rent-controlled cities.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. That's all the questions I have for you. My fear would be, historically, the cost of housing and rents are at an all-time high And what I just heard was rent control has the capacity to take that to a whole new level. And that's the very issue that this committee has been spending the last year and a half trying to solve. So with that, Senator Draheim, any closing remarks regarding your bill?
No, I just want to thank everybody for being here and testifying for or against, and the comments from my colleagues on the committee here. You know, we've heard over the last couple hearings on this, you know, from tenants that have already felt the impact of rent control, where the rent are, you know, are going up 40, 60%. It's very alarming for all of us. I know that. We all care about this subject. It's just really scary to me that we passed legislation or a city passed legislation without a definition of what the terms are. What is rent? Could not be answered in the last hearing from Mayor Carter. And that's the basis for the whole proposal, when you don't even know what your terms are defined. So I think we all care about rent. We all care about affordability. But I know that this is the best solution, is to close this loophole, and let's work together to fix some of the other issues that were brought up by Senator Dietzick and others. So with that, I urge a yay on this bill.
Very good. With that, Senator Draheim renews his motion that Senate File 3414 be recommended to pass and re-referred to the Committee on Local Government. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed?
No.
The motion carries. That's all we have on the agenda. Mr. Chair, if you have any announcements to make regarding upcoming meetings, I would love to give you the opportunity.
No, I just hope we start on time next time.
Very good. We are adjourned.